Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
We are on Zevachim Gimel. And we're trying to find a source for, if you write a get, Shalol Lishma, that is possible. So, Yisrael came, Kosov Lagarse Ishto, person wrote a get, V'nimlach, and he changed his mind. He decided not to use this document to divorce her. And let's say the document describes a woman, Rochel Bas Shmuel. And the name of the husband was Avram ben Yaakov. Matzu ben Imo, Matzu ben Iro v'Amarlo, and somebody in the street found this discarded get. And he finds Shmi kishmecha v'shem ishti k'shem ishtecha. I see it's my name, it's my wife's name. I'm going to use this get to divorce my wife. Pasul lagarishbo. He may not, because originally it was written for a different woman. So, and also l'chura, it's a proof that if the get was written stam without any kavana, it's also possible. Even though, remember, before we brought the case where the sofer was teaching his students. So that get was not written to divorce a woman, it was written to teach. This get was actually written to divorce, and then the guy changed his mind. But the Gemara says it's not a proof. Dilma shani awesome the intik le'lashem gerushan ahu. Since he pulled the string on this get, so it's not going to be used for this woman, so nobody else can use it. But maybe a get that was just written stam, maybe it would be kosher. Elameha. So the Gemara is going to find its third proof. Yisrael came. Yesh lo shtei nashim. Person had two wives. Sheshmoseim shavus, and his wives had the same names. One was older, one was younger. Kosav lagarish posagdola. If the get was written for the older woman, lo yigarsh posaktona, you can't use it for the ktana. Why? Obviously, it was not written lishma. So the Gemara says no proof. Dilma shani hasam. Intikle l'shem gerushin de'ayi. Yeah, this guy's name was the same name, but the name of the woman it's not the same woman. And here it was specifically written for a specific woman. Maybe if it was written stam, maybe it would be kosher. So LMAH, the fourth attempt. Yeser al Kain. Person has two wives with the same name. V'omer lelavler, he tells the sofer, ksov, write a get for one of my wives. Ule'ezes she'erche egarit. Whoever I decide to give it to, I'll give it to. Posel garishbo. So again, why is it possible? Because you got to rate, it's not written lishma of a specific woman. So the Gemara says maybe it's not a proof regarding a get that was written stam, because dilmi shani asam, because we have a rule throughout Shas, the ein breira. We don't say that once he decides to give that specific woman again, it's hurvra adavar l'mafreya retroactively that she was the one I wanted all the time. Well, we don't have breira. So ela meha hakosev tovse gittin. So soifers. There are two components to a get. There's like the boilerplate standard lashon, and then there's the unique specifiers: the name of the man, the name of the woman, the name of the city, the date. So let's say a sofer writes a whole bunch of tofse gittin, which is all the boilerplate stuff. So what does he have to leave blank? That he writes it l'shem when it comes to write the get. Sarach shianiach makom ha'ish, where the man is, umakom ha'isha, where the woman is, umakom ha'edim. You have to leave a place for the name of the man, the name of the woman, the edim, u'makam hazman, and the date. You have to leave the words harei at muteres l'chol adam. That's the most important part of the get. You are permitted to marry any man. And it's got to be written for this specific woman. So we see from here, finally, that a get that's not written l'shem a specific woman, even if you wrote it stam, it's possible. Su Rami Milsach Risi. Rava showed another stira. A chatas, if you had in mind that it should be an ola, it's possible. But shachtel l'shem chulin. Let's say when he shechted the ola, he had in mind that it's going to be like a chulin animal, which is private meat. Kshem. Alma dimina. Having in mind something which is in the same category, meaning another type of kochim, machriv ba. So that damages the original kavanah. But thinking about chulin, which is not hegdish at all, the lav mina lo machriv ba. It's not considered that it ruins it. But v'reminu. I'll show you a stira from the following. Kol haget shenichtav shelo l'shem isha posel. If a get wasn't written for a specific woman, it's possible. Vafilu shem goya, nami possible. Let's say you wrote it l'shem a non-Jew. Now, a goya is also not a bar minah with a Jewish woman, because there's no get applies to her. So the point Rav is trying to make, the afilu l'shem goya, it should have been kosher, like thinking about chulin, since it's not a bar minah. However, Shani, Rava himself found the answer. Get dal goya minei. So a goya has nothing to do with a get. And even if they wouldn't have written the name of the goya, you would have been left with what? Havale stama. It would have been like a blank get. And we've already learned Ustam apostle. So either way you go, whether you have her name there or not her name there, you have a apostle that could get. Kotchim, if dal chulaminayu, if you get rid of the chul, you treat the chul as if it was not really there, then you're by stam. Then it's like you shechted without any thought. Ustama ksherim. And then already we learned yesterday, stam kotchim, since the Bezdin make its original t'nai, if you don't uproot and you have no kavanah at all, stam korban will be kosher. V'rama milsach risi. Rava showed another stira. Rab said, a chatas that you shechted with the kavanah of an ola, it's possible. But if you had in mind chulin, it's kosher. Alma mino machriv ba, lo mino lo machriv ba. What makes it possible is because an ola is the type of kotshim. And you tried to, you were starting off with a chatas. So that breaks it. But chulin, which is not sort of the same species as a chatas, it doesn't destroy it. However, v'atanya, we have a complicated case. The pasuk says, "V'chol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho." You have an earthenware kli, and there's food in there, and you dangle a dead sheretz within the airspace of this kli cheres. It says, "Kol asher b'socho yitma." Any food stuff within that kli also becomes tummy. Now, tocho is tocho v'loch toch tocho. Only the inside of the kli itself, but not, let's say within this earthenware kli, you had other kalim, and there was food in those kalim. So the other kalim protect the food and they don't become tummy. Afil klei shetev. Even kalim made out of metal or wood, Now, why does it say metal or wood? Because metal and wood are makabel tuma from the outside. If you touch it on the outside, not on the inside, it becomes tummy. So even though they are items that are makabel tuma, they're matzil. And klicheres and kliates are not the same min as a klicheres, yet it's being mevatel the din of the klicheres. So shani rava, really metal and wood claim are considered the same species of klicheres because they're both kalim. But also chulin etzel kochim, chulin is not in the same species as kochim. They made it like a mechitza etzel tanur. If you have an oven and you try to put a metal divider within the oven, lo mahanya klal, you have something tamei on one side of this dividing thing that you want to put in there, and food on the other. If the oven and the food, if the food and the dover tamei are in the same oven, whether you put a mechitza in there or not, it doesn't work to separate it, because a separation is not considered part of the tanur, so it's not a chatzitza. Af chulin etzel kochim lo mahanya klal. So chulin is a completely different species than kochim. It doesn't serve to passel it. Now, where do we see this inyan regarding a mechitza and a tanur? There's not. Tanur, you have a earthenware tanur oven. Shechatzitzu b'nesorim b'yiriyos, that you put inside the oven, either wooden planks or curtains. V'nimtza sheretz b'mokom echad, and there's a dead sheretz on one side and food on the other side. Hakol tamei. Everything becomes tamei because we're both in the tanur, and we don't view whatever you try to divide it with as something that serves as a chatzitza. Similarly, a kaveres, a beehive that's made out of straw. Shehi pchusa, it's been broken, so it's not a kli anymore. Even though it's pkuka bakash, and even though you've sort of added straw to it, umishushelis la'avirat tanur, and it's hanging into the oven and separates inside the oven. Sheretz betocha atanur tamei. If the sheretz is in this beehive, the walls of the beehive doesn't serve as a chatzitza, and anything in the oven, including food in the oven, becomes tamei. And if the sheretz with the tanur, and you have food in this beehive, there's no chatzitza. According to Chachamim, Rabbi Eliezer metayer. Rabbi Eliezer sees it as a chatzitza. Rabbi Eliezer kal v'chomer. Im hitzel b'meisa chamor. Now, if you have a corpse in a room, in a house, anything in that room becomes tamei b'tuma soil. It's metame adam v'kelim for 7 days. Now, if you have a mechitza like this beehive and you have food in there, and you put it in the room with the corpse, it does protect the food from becoming tamei. So if it works for meis hachomer lo tatzel b'klicheres hakal, when you dangle a sheretz within the airspace of a klicheres, it should certainly save the food in the klicheres from becoming tamei. That's Rabbi Elazar's argument. Amr lo. Chachamim disagree. Im hitzel b'meis chomer, you know why it saves food within a room that the corpse is in? Shekein chalucha ba'olim. Because we know people divide up a room for privacy. They'll put, standing division, somebody will sleep on that side of it. That's common for a room to be divided, and each is considered its own place. But why should it be tatzah b'klicheres hakal shein chaluk and bo'alim? It's not the minhag for us to put something in an oven and divide it. The inside of an oven is considered to be one whole thing, and you can't really divide it from one side to the other. So that was the Chachamim's response to Rabbi Eliezer. So hatinich l'Rabbanon. We understand the Rabbanon who understand that mechitza doesn't matzil, but Rabbi Eliezer Michael Meimar. How does Rabbi Eliezer respond? Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rav, that if it's not its min, it doesn't work. But by an oven, kal v'chomer kamar, he learned the kal v'chomer that we learned. Iachi hasam nami lema, by a chatas, when we said that you shachted the l'shem chulin, we say that doesn't make a problem because it's not the same min, we can say kal v'chomer kodshim mechalin kodshim. Kodshim kim mechalil other kodshim. If kodshim can do it, like if you have in mind that on a chatas you have an ola, certainly chulin should certainly be machala. Ela time of the Rav for a different reason. Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer, my time of the Rav, that Rav said, if you shech the chatas l'shem oila, it's possible. If you shech the chatas l'shem chulin, it's okay. Why? Because it says v'lo yichalu es kodshei bnei Yisrael es asher yirimu l'Hashem. Kodshim mechalim kodshim, vein chulin mechalim kodshim. So it's exersa kosuf. Alma Asr Kra Afka, the Torah comes and gets rid of the Kal V'chomer that we could have learned. For the Gemara Chanami, we have the word, also Rabbi Eliezer learned from a Kal V'chomer of Mechitza works by an oven, even though it's not its own min. Lacy, let's bring the words Tocho, that is written that a Mechitza doesn't matzil it, Liv Kem Kal V'chomer, could have removed from the Kal V'chomer. So the Gemara says you can't use that because high toichel maboile. Tocho is needed for a different din. Lo oichlin shegivlin betit. You have food, and you kneaded them with some kind of clay. You covered it with clay. Vichnisan lavir tanu, and you put this clay-covered food into an oven. Sal kedayt chaymar tar hoilu v'negia lo metame. If the sheretz would have touched this clay-covered food, it would not become tameh because the clay is a chatzitza, baviro, in the airspace of the tanur. So baviro nami lo mitamu. So I would think to tell me that kol asher b'tocho, even so, the ochel is mitame. But Rabbanon, who argued with Rabbi Eliezer, says, Hanech lo tzrich ikra. We understand it by himself that the oichlim are within the airspace of the kli, and they're certainly, if they don't have another kli around it, they would become tame in the airspace of the kli. Rav Yosef Barami Rami, Shinu Kodesh and Shinu Bailim. He showed us a stira by having in mind a different type of korban versus a different type of bailim, umeshani, and he was able to be mitaritz. This was his question. Miyomer Rav, chatas sheshach l'shem chatas, a chatas that was shechted with in mind for another chatas. For example, one guy ate chalev, the other ate dam, but they're both chatas, kshem. But l'shem oila psula. Alma de lav mina machriv ba. A korban that's not within the same species will puzzle it. But mina, a chatas and a chatas lo machriv ba. I've amarav chatas sheshachta. If you shechted a chatas and you didn't have in mind the right owner, al misha mechuyev chatas psula. Even though he had in mind somebody else who was machayev chatas, it's still possible. If you shechted it on behalf of somebody, al misha mechuyev oilek sheira. That seems to flip it on its head. Alma davar minah is here the chatas nachatas was machriv ba, and the lav minah, the oila lo machriv ba. So we seem to have a stira. Umishani hosam. They resolved the stira. Because it says if you change the kavana for what type of korban, it says, V'shachat osa lechatas. You have to shecht it in mind for a chatas, amrachmana. And even though you were thinking about another man, but he was bringing a chatas. Very chatas shim chatas nishchatas. It's kosher. Hacha, when it comes to different bailim, it says, V'chiper alav. Alav ol chavero. So if you have in mind the chavero with passos is dum yedidei, shemachuyev kaparosa kamoso. He might have required some atonement, but it's not the same. It's not the same as somebody who's mechayiv and ola. Rav Chaviva Rami by Shinu Bailim and Toch Tocho Umeshani. Umiyamar Rav Chatas Sheshach Al Misha Mechayiv Chatas Psula Al Misha Mechayiv Oilek Sheva. Did Rav really say this? If you shecht a chatas for another person who had to bring a chatas, it's possible. But for somebody who had to bring an olak sheira, alma mina machriv ba, chatas will ruin it, and lav mina lo machriv ba. But an ola, which is not the same species as a chatas, does not ruin it. Vatanya, tocho, when you dangle a sheretz within the airspace of a kli cheres, it's matami the food. However, lo toch tocho. But if you have a kli within a kli, the kli within a kli will protect it. I feel kli shetef matzah, even wood and metal, even which is not the same min, because it's not made out of earthenware. So umeshani, the way we were metamits there is the following. It says arba atoicho ksivi. It says in that parsha tocho 4 times, and it could have written toch, and it wrote tocho. And it could have written toch and it wrote tocho. So we have 4 different limudim. Chad legufe. We need to tell me the standard halacha that the dead sheretz doesn't have to mamish be in the kli, you just have to dangle it in the airspace. Chad legzera shava. To tell you that just like a kli is metame, even though nothing touched it, so too other things within the kli become tome even though it didn't touch it. Chad, the third tocho says tocho shel zeh v'lo tocho shel acher. It's only a dead sheretz in an earthenware kli that will do this. But if it's a metal or a wooden kli, it's not metame. Then it's only metame if it actually touches the kli. What's the 4th tocho? Idich tocho v'lo toch tocho. That a kli within the earthenware kli, if it's got food in it, it'll protect it. The afilu kli shetef, even if this kli was made out of wood or metal, matzil. Okay, stop here. We're going to learn Surah by 8 o'clock.
And tomorrow at 7:15 again?
Tomorrow at 7:15. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.